Welcome to this meeting of the South Burlington School Board. We usually begin with comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. I'm going to preempt that just for a moment to read a letter that I wrote to Elizabeth Fitzgerald in her capacity as clerk of our board on Thursday. Dear Elizabeth, I hereby resign as a member and chair of the South Burlington School Board of School Directors effective as of June 30, 2013. It's been a pleasure to serve, and I thank you and our president and former board colleagues for being so dedicated and wonderful to work with. I also want to thank David Young and the other staff who regularly work directly with the board. Delina Gilroy, Meg Collins, Diane Kinnan, Linton Goodrich, Stuart Weiss, and John Stewart for all they have done to facilitate my board service. Best wishes. So I am embarking upon the last 6 weeks of my service to this board. We'll miss that service, but thank you all for everything that all of you have done to make this a really satisfying and interesting experience.
Rich, I think I join my current and all your former board colleagues in acknowledging 12 years of service on the board and 6 years as board chair. I know the community, the students here, our families and staff all appreciate your dedicated service, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to celebrate that more formally, but I'd just like to thank you for that on behalf of the board and acknowledge your contributions.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The board does have the authority under the city charter to appoint a successor for my position for the balance of my term, which runs approximately 8 months. And one of the things that we need to put on the agenda is to establish a process to do that. One of the reasons I wanted to give some notice was to make it possible to fill that vacancy as soon as I leave or very shortly thereafter. So hopefully we can do that. With that, are there comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda? Okay. Don't hear any. That takes us to update on the current status of the Howard Center's permit to open a methadone clinic at 364 Dorset Street. David, is there anything new?
I wanted to let the board know that we have submitted all of our information regarding discovery, and we're waiting to hear back from the Howard Center. We expect to hear back not later than May 31st, which will be the term limit that they've informed us of. In addition, I did send a letter on May 8th to Todd Centebear requesting specifically when completion of the methadone clinic would be done, as we have things to prepare and advise parents and staff of, I believe, their occupancy, if that so happens sooner than when we know. And so I've sent that. I have not heard back from him. And I will certainly keep the board posted upon hearing back from them. In addition, I also, at your place, is some information specific about the Howard Center services. It was a request by the board a couple meetings ago. So on that sheet provides the board with some information, about those services and whether or not they could be found elsewhere. And I've asked Joanne Godak, who is here with us tonight, if the board has any questions specific to those services. So with that said, that's the update on the methadone clinic to date. And any questions you have for Joanne, I would certainly be happy to entertain, or others.
So this would be the time to do that.
Correct.
Are there questions?
Yeah, I have a few specific questions and just a couple broader points. I guess I'll ask the more specific questions first. You say at one point in this that Howard Centers are designated community mental health provider. I'm wondering, what does that mean? Are there other community mental health providers that could be designated? I just need further.
NFI does provide some support to the community as far as crisis prevention, but not really services per se for students, except for the one program that they work with Howard on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question, you list Baird School, and you have as options Centerpoint School there, but then Centerpoint School is listed at number 6 as well. I mean, how does Howard Center work with those two schools? I was a little confused.
Centerpoint is part of Howard. It's one of those, also one of those programs that NFI and Howard work together on.
Okay.
So it's kind of a collaboration. I think, I don't have that description. We had it described in one of the handouts that we gave you a few meetings ago. It's NFI works with Howard with Centerpoint because they provide a variety of services, some of those drug and alcohol services, and some of those this therapeutic program that some of our students sometimes take part in.
Okay. So really, as far as non-Howard Center options, for some of these at least, it's the Belkate School, is that correct?
Right.
All right.
Belkate, and then there's the ALMC program as well, which is an
Okay.
autism option.
Okay. And then the others, it seems a recurring theme through this is bringing services in-house.
Right.
And that's something I know that has come up in other contexts over the last couple of years as far as making sure that when it makes sense to bring something in-house, that we do so. If we're contracting out for services so much that we can probably break even by bringing it in-house, that should be looked at. But this is obviously a more specific circumstance. What I was missing, I still, having read this, we only got it today, so I haven't had a chance to really study it, but it doesn't seem to necessarily give quite enough information to really figure out how to proceed at this point. For instance, there's, I guess, two issues that I would like to see a little bit fleshed out a little bit more. For instance, on the contract for school-based clinicians, and this could probably apply to actually all these, is I wanted to get a better idea of how much more would it cost to bring it in-house or to go to Belkate or to ALMC, because we need to do, we may at some point want to do some sort of cost benefit to determine, what's the benefit of going to another location or bringing it in-house. But the other thing is that I want to know in that kind of cost benefit analysis really to understand better the impacts to students as well, because I mean this is really just the cost.
Correct.
If it's going to cost X amount more, but not provide as good as services for the student, then we should know that, and then it seems to be a pretty easy
And they're kind of,
answer.
they're also
but-
individualized decisions based on the
Right.
child's needs.
Sure. But is there a way to get a general sense of, all right, we can bring this in-house and it's going to cost us X amount, and the benefits are that we have more control, it's in-house, and it's not Howard Center. I mean, so that's kind of, this doesn't seem to be, it doesn't really give me at least enough to know what a next step would be on this issue.
Well, I mean, let me just, again, there may be a desire for more detail, Martin, which is fine for us to do. I mean, from our perspective, and what Joanne, and again, I don't have all of the specifics, but in my time, one of the things that we've been mindful of is trying, and Joanne has done this, is wherever we can find an opportunity to do it internally and cost benefit, and let me reverse that, internally that benefits students and as a cost benefit is the way in which we want to go. And Joanne, we have several instances where we've done that and taken ourselves away from the dependency of an outside service. However, that said, we also know that our students transition through our system or connect through community-based services, and having that linkage, whether it be in the summertime or off time or postgraduate, is also a component in which weighs into us, some of the decision-making as well.
Sure.
And so,
And I mean, that certainly gets into the best interest of the
Right.
child, I understand that. But this may have, I don't know if it has, it may have shifted the cost benefit analysis for bringing it in-house. If it's gonna cost us a bit more, would the community support bringing it in-house rather than contracting with Howard Center? And we may not have gone in-house on certain services because we're getting it from cheaper, less expensive outside. But this may have shifted that. That's just me speaking. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks on that. But it may have shifted a little bit that, it's willing to be a little less tied to Howard Center, to pay a little more, to bring it in-house and get all the other benefits that I understand we would have from certain services being provided in-house. But I don't think that we can figure that out from what this is.
The one thing also you need to note is that for services that we provide for IEP students, which the contract for school-based clinicians is not for students on IEPs, but for students who have IEP service, we have to consider the continuum of services. We need to look to provide them in the least restrictive environment, but for some students, the least restrictive environment might not be here in our school system. And we have to offer those options to students. So we can't say that we'll bring everything in-house, because there have to be options that might be more restrictive for certain students.
Sure, I understand.
Okay.
And that's another thing in here it doesn't say, and I understand it can be on an individual basis, that we can't go out. You know, we can't take this in-house. We can't go somewhere else.
Right.
We can't do
Right.
that because of
Yeah.
the needs of the student. And I'm not suggesting to bring things in-house if
But I think
if we
that's
just
been our
can't.
mission. Our mission has been to build capacity within the school district to try and meet all the needs of the children within this community. That's been our mission. We've done that around our children with autism. We've done it around our children with mental health needs, to really try and provide those services. So in part, what you see, what I've described here, is most of the services are provided. It's very, very few that go out. Probably the biggest area would be the school-based clinicians to look at. And that's really not an IEP team decision. That's really a contract that we have for preventative services in the district.
Right.
Is it an academic calendar contract? Is that what we currently have with those clinicians?
With the school-based clinicians, yes, they're only here during the academic year. Yeah.
And it's just, my only point, I don't mean to be redundant, is that this may have shifted, maybe not, shifted the balance of cost benefit. You know, how much more is it to bring that aspect in-house? And do we want to have one less tie that we don't have to have with Howard Center?
Yep.
So how would you like to proceed, Martin or Rich? I mean, is that a board desire?
Let me just make a point
Yeah,
about
no,
this discussion. I'm not exactly sure of my history here, but I think the way in which the community mental health system came to exist in Vermont is that many years ago, most mental health services were provided through the state hospital in Waterbury. And when it was decided to deinstitutionalize those services, the state set up a community mental health agency in each county. And Howard is the community mental health agency in this county. And that is where the bulk of state funding for community mental health services in this county goes. So I think it's not very practical to think about doing much in another direction. And from my perspective, even if there might be a few dollars that could be saved, not very good policy to do that, because it doesn't fit in really with state policy to do that. So I think it always is appropriate to look at our costs. I can't deny that for a moment. And if we're paying more than we need to pay, we ought to think about that with anybody, any contractor that we deal with. But I would be very reluctant to go very deeply into this subject myself. Just my thinking.
And I was just going to add to that the Howard Center is the DA, or designated agency, for Chittenden County for both community mental health and developmental services. So if families are connected to those services within the school district, they also might have a case manager. They also might be receiving respite funding. They could be receiving a lot of or other developmental services at the Howard Center. And in terms of continuity of care, I guess I would question whether I would want to disrupt any kind of therapeutic relationship that a child and family have with a program that's in our school.
Yeah.
That's just where I'm coming from.
No, I mean, I agree at that point as well. And maybe there is nothing that can be done, but if there is an area where there isn't going to be harm to children's interest, that we can take in-house or take elsewhere, and even if it costs a little bit, I'd like to understand the cost, and then we can weigh this. You know, if it's a bunch more money, then, well, we'll just have to deal with that, but.
Well, I think what Joanne's saying, though, is that is their practice anyway. So if there were cases where we could bring things in-house, correct me if I'm wrong, and that would provide a cost benefit, we would have done that already. Is that true?
It's not always a cost benefit. Well, yeah, cost benefit. It might not be cheaper to do it.
Right.
But it's in the child's best interest to
Sure.
be in the least restrictive environment, so. And you can
Well,
see in some of these, yeah.
And in fairness to Joanne, I mean, you know, some of her, just, again, this brief, just information, there's some cost drive. I mean, part of this is, when Joanne has made these decisions, I mean, she's included me and, in the past, you know, John Everett, around the thinking around these services, and so these arrows are obviously have associated costs with them, and as she eloquently alluded to, I mean, it's those choices. If the cost is extremely high to go out, but it's in the best interest, then, you know, we try to weigh that out. And I think there's many positive examples where we brought that back in check. I think that's been ongoing. Again, there are those situations where there are individual students, which in the least restrictive environment, you know, we have to do what is best, and those are cost drivers as well. But
So I think the question that this presents is whether the board wants to seek more detailed financial information on any or all these points. Martin, is that your
Yeah,
perspective?
Well, it's not just, maybe I'm not being clear, but in using the rubric of a cost-benefit analysis, I understand if the costs are simply that, all right, we're paying $100,000 for school-based clinicians to Howard Center. I don't know what the figure is. But we would be fine if we did it in-house, but it'll cost us $120,000. In other words, the students won't be affected, we won't have a problem with continuity of services. And it's a decision, is it worth $20,000 to do it in-house? Normally you wouldn't, because you're fine with what we're doing for $100,000, you're saving us $20,000. But there's this other factor of, at least I view, that the community wants us to be less tied to the Howard Center, and where we don't have to be giving them money for services then we shouldn't. But, you know, in the context of cost-benefit analysis, if going in-house is going to affect the service and it's not going to, you know, the continuity of the service, well, then it doesn't matter. That financial part doesn't matter. So it could be very straightforward. I mean, it could be that, you know, what we have right now works, and if we go to in-house on certain things, it's going to be worse for a student. This doesn't tell us that,
Right.
but that would seem to be a simple case. But if we can go in-house, and it might cost us a little bit more, but we also have the benefits of more control, et cetera, and not having Howard Center, then I think we should consider that. Maybe there aren't any of those cases, and then it's easy.
Martin, are you thinking specifically with a contract for school-based services, the district hiring its own social workers, for example, instead of providing a contract to the Howard Center? Is that?
Yeah, for
One
example.
example.
I mean, I
Okay.
leave that kind of detail. I'm just trying to conceptually, and I don't seem to be getting it out. Maybe I finally have explained myself.
It would cost us a lot more to bring the school-based clinicians in-house, because they receive Medicaid funding for those. We have a contract with them, so it would cost us a lot more. Is there a benefit analysis? I don't know. We have the relationship, again, you were bringing up, Diane, the relationship with the community. The community health center is important for those families, because that's not the only service that they're gonna receive. There'll be other services, so.
Right.
I mean, I think, I don't know if you want more information than that, but I don't know if David wants me to look into the details of all the financial pieces of that. We could certainly do that, John and I could do that, that would be helpful. But,
I have a question. If the school-based clinicians draw down Medicaid funds for the Howard Center, if those school-based clinicians were, say, at the district, would they draw down those same Medicaid
no,
funds
because we're
into
not
the
a
district?
designated, we're not a designated mental health agency, we're a school district, so we would not be able to do that. Yeah.
So I mean, if it's
the
pretty
cost
plain
benefit.
that it's gonna be a lot more money, then yeah, that also seems no reason to look into the detail. But the fact that you've explained that, the fact that people come to me more than anything else. They go to Julie for everything else. But they come to me and they say, I can't believe Howard Center is still in the school. Why don't you get Howard Center out of the school? And so that's in part why I'm trying to really understand.
Right.
And to the extent that they can watch today on the RETN and they can see their answer, then, you know, I don't need to keep on pushing this. I mean, if it's just, it doesn't make any sense financially or any sense for the benefit of the children, no, then, you know, we stop here with what this is tonight, I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I guess I would say, I would approach it from a different perspective, Martin, and that is this. I'm not very happy with what Howard Center did with respect to the methadone clinic. I do not think that the right solution to that problem is for us to become more distant from the Howard Center. I think that the right solution to avoid that kind of problem in the future is for us to be closer to the Howard Center, because the Howard Center is the designated community mental health agency for this community. And I just think it would be a mistake, even if we could save a little money, to respond in that way. So I would not support that.
Well, and I think
Myself.
there's, I mean, I see it's probably a similar spin on the same view, which actually is a segue into another issue, David, around this topic. But I would look at it, and part of, I think, the question you're asking, Martin, is we as a district incur expenses associated with Howard Center services in aggregate. There's a description of them on this sheet. We are likely to also incur some expenses related to changes in our security and safety protocol if and when the methadone clinic opens up. So to that end, I think the question is, were there any offsets that we might anticipate looking at? It would be part of the equation. But I do agree with Rich that I think we'll always look, and I know we've been diligent during budgeting time of looking at where we've had sort of recurring expenses with types of services that are offered, and I think school-based social workers was a good example. Psychologists was another example, but professional services that we seem to see on a fairly recurring basis, and really just asking the question, is there enough need for these services on an ongoing basis that it might make sense to bring them inside? So independent of the Howard Center, I think that's a good question to be asking. I think the other one is really linked to, I know you've requested, David, and I don't want to get off track with your question, but it's a follow-on, once you do receive feedback, is there a team of folks in place that you would charge with evaluating current safety practice and protocol?
Well, I haven't established a team per se, but I certainly have designated individuals that I want to assist me in, figuring out what we're going to need to do. I have some ideas around that, but, and we'll be on it. Again, that's in part, trying to figure out kind of the timeline here a little bit and be ahead of it. I mean, I do want to add on, I think it's right that, your words, Rich, not happy with what we'll say upper level management. I think it's important. We have many staff that often some of you may walk by when you visit our schools, who are providing excellent service to our students, and they're very much part of our school. And we don't necessarily. A lot of people don't really know who they are. They don't have labels. Or badges different than ours, and they're really one of ours, and they really do provide great service. Again, I'm not trying to take away, your point around the management decisions and location next to our school, but
I think,
important to
David,
note.
yeah, that we have an issue with this
Yes.
one program in the Howard Center, but I think it's important that we, as best as we can, maintain positive relationships. I mean, we are partners for the mentoring program with the Howard Center. We, receive services for students in the school. And I think those relationships need to be positive, and we have to deal with this other piece at the same time, and it's uncomfortable.
Well, I don't
I
think
don't-
Martin's
I- well, go ahead.
suggesting that at all. I think.
No, I
think
know that.
The
I know
real
that.
issue that came up at the inception of this would be like with any provider of products or services to the district, if you have a situation where you have an overall contract and you have an element of that contract that you're dissatisfied with, it's really looking at alternative sources of services to make sure if there's an opportunity for a backup plan. It's just prudent in every case to make sure you have a backup plan in the event that your primary provider goes away, but secondarily just to understand what is offered and what the trade-off is between the relationship with the service provider and the value to the students that they're providing that service toward. So, I mean, I think it's a legitimate question.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I do want the administration to continue to work positively with Howard Center on these issues. I want Joanne to have that positive relationship. I personally do not have anything positive towards Howard Center right now. I mean, in the board, position as a board member, I think they're being hypocritical in what they're doing. On one hand, assisting our kids in many very positive ways, but on the other hand, putting them at risk. So I want the administration who's working with them to be positive. I'm not willing, or at this point, want to go have hugs with Howard Center, so, all right, fair enough.
Well, I guess the question for the board is this. What we have is a general sense of costs, or the direction of costs, really. Is it your request, Martin, that the administration put together a cost comparison?
No, I don't, I mean, from what I've already heard from Joanne, I don't think that that's necessary. I think that'll just be wasted time. I mean, if there are places that come up down the road that it makes more sense, this should just be another factor.
Right.
But no, I'm fine.
Anything else on this, then? I guess there is a need to calendar the subject of adjusting to the possibility that the methadone clinic may be our near neighbor, and we should probably take that up under future agenda items.
Yeah, I've kept, this particular item on our agenda, and I'll continue to do so and add some detail to it around, timelines, if that does happen to be the case.
All right.
Yeah.
Then the next thing we're ready for is the superintendent's report.
Mm-hmm. So I would have that enclosed in the packet. And again, these are welcoming questions that you still may have, but again, I felt it was important to follow up with you from the past meeting where you had the foundation update, and that was so noted that there was some monies remaining, and so again, wanted to let you know that they're expecting to be paid back in the next 2 years. And there's dedicated funds currently that play out for named scholarships that were donations that were made, which is in part made up of the balance. The Schools Out program, again, that's part of our follow-on from one of our past board meetings, and we will have more specific information for you on what I'll say, not overplaying cost-benefit analysis, but that works here again for the June 5th meeting to provide the board with some additional clarity on that. Some update on facilities here at the middle school. As you know, the elevator's been out of service, and it is in the process of being repaired. Again, a lot of it is parts on order and parts awaiting, and a little bit of work, being done, in preparation. So that's ongoing. We're still on time for that.
It looks like I'm smiling on that point. I'm smiling wryly, that I can only imagine how much trouble and difficulty that has caused for the people who work for our district, including particularly our special educators, and I thank them for the efforts that I know have been made to adjust for the fact that we haven't had this elevator in service.
Well, it's been, I think that you just don't know. I mean, there's many students and many staff, we take it for granted, those access, and I think you as a board have been really good and diligent about that, and trying to get ourselves on board with that. And, we've been doing the work, as I said, on the elevators, but, one elevator in a building, you're really vulnerable when it doesn't work. And so people have been very cooperative, but it's a huge inconvenience, clearly. And again, just giving you an update. Electrical work, we initially thought this was going to be a longer period of delay with a more significant improvement. It's looking like July 9th, Tuesday, July 9th, the high school will be without power, which will mean, everything. That where our main servers are located, obviously things will be backed up and, hibernating, if you will, but phones even will be down, as that's our main call center in there as well. And so things like summer school won't happen on that day. Other schools will be, office staff will be in session, but just wanting you to know that we've thought long and hard about how to continue to keep summer school, but with the phones being out, that's a major area around communication, so summer school won't happen on that day, Tuesday, July 9th. We're very happy with the plan and the resolve on that. Middle school air conditioning, it's back on. We had a part that was ordered. It always seems, and we've gotten a fair amount of feedback from folks during that last hot spell, we just put a lot of money into it, why has this continued to happen? It was it was a fairly easy fix. I have talked to Bart, and we'll put in, some timelines for what I'll say like a May, let's do a status check on the system. In some cases, that's often hard, because you gotta have kind of a load on the system in order to know it's working, but nonetheless, there's ways to do some checks and balances on that, because it's been a hot, no pun intended, a hot item on that one. The Act 156 grant, again, the financial stewardship of that has changed to Milton. And again, this is part of Wynn's work, and, I am supportive of us getting the information about the transportation and the opportunity to be more efficient with transportation in and around Chittenden County and beyond. And so I do support that, but again, they're going to be hosting that. We are not going to be hosting the fiduciary of that. And then item number 5 on enrollments. Again, I want to spend a little bit of time on this with you because, as you know, 2 of our schools in not meeting adequate yearly progress, which is every school in the country needed to make 100%, at 100% attainable outcomes by 2014. Orchard and Chamberlain are in the targeted phase, not meeting adequate yearly progress, which means they had choice. We went through this last year. We had very few. We had to institute that fairly late in the summer. We had a few that took advantage of that. We've had more take advantage of that this year. When I say more, we've had about 17 students, 1 from Orchard, the remaining from Chamberlain, moving from Chamberlain over to Central School. And so I'm just wanting to let you know that there's a transfer of some staff, which, as you know, is not easy because, our staff develop relationships with the students and surrounding staff. But that is underway, and it's likely that you may hear about that a little bit or have heard a little bit about that, but we're trying to be really mindful of resourcing. Currently, I've made no commitments to we have a contingent teacher in our budget, but I've made no plans to use that. We'll continue to watch enrollments over the summer and make a decision as we get closer to the start of school. So that's my report. I don't know if you have any specific questions that I didn't address that you'd like to talk more about.
Are there questions for the superintendent? I don't hear any.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you, David. That takes us to item 7, administrative reports discussion, future financial planning.
So let me just quickly kick this off. Again, John, and there's been a fair amount of effort put into this, and I think Julie has been a player in that as well. Well, that.
This is different.
Yeah. So we've got a couple different things going on. We've got, I'm trying to jump ahead to our retirement benefit. I want to get that off our future financial burden, I suppose. But our future financial plan, this is really our advisory we've melded into the future financial plan. And this was a date, actually, we had a date set to give you an update on kind of our current status. And so I'll let John kind of give you a quick update on where we are and where we're headed. So, John.
Well, the first thing we did was extend the plan out to, instead of 5 years, to get it out to 2020 to coincide with what David wants to do for the whole district and everything we're doing. We looked at the Government Finance Officers Association and found a template from a city in Washington that has an ongoing financial plan to use as our guide. All the documents that we've shared to date, with a couple that aren't posted there, are on the business office website under Citizens Budget 5-year financial plan, so anybody in the public can see them, but school board too, obviously. We started with 6 members, 2 of which have had to leave the committee, so we have 4 people who have been faithful for the last number of years. Dan Fleming, Brenda Balin, Kathy Sheffield, and Lisa Levitt. So, we've met 3 different times. We've looked at, some of the things that we have to do as far as capital, what decisions need to be made as far as bonding and leases and what some of the factors are. Focusing in next is to do an update of the 2015 projection that we did as part of the budget in January with data that was available then. But many things have transpired since then. Our budget for 14 has passed, and the legislative session is over, so we know things like the base education tax rate for both commercial and residential, changes in the penalty box limit, the maximum 123%, 121, things that we'll summarize for you in the future. And our limitations on school choice have become more solid. The problem we see with school choice in the future didn't go away with the legislative session, and I would say we're kind of alone. David can talk more about that, but we're alone in that part of our finances. So the next step is really for, one other thing we did, and David will talk more about this, is enrollment. He's enlisted the help of Bill Smith again, and we, as a group, a week ago, looked at some preliminary numbers from Bill Smith and enlisted comments from the group as far as what questions should we be asking, what kind of trends are we seeing, what are our plans as far as schools we want to have, that kind of thing. I know David has since met with Mr. Smith, and you'll probably talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, let me just, again, I think this is such an important driver, to our financial future. Understanding, again, choice and tuition, but our resident student population and what's currently within South Burlington now and into the forecasted future. So Bill Smith has been doing this work, and you'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit from him, as I think enrollment is really an important perspective for the board to get a little bit more information about. Again, we've gotten our preliminary report back, and the advisory group, future planning group, I gotta get that right, has provided some really good feedback. I will be meeting with the city as well, because I think it's really important to interface with the city and the enrollment projections. We did this a little bit about 6 years ago, but we've fallen off that, and really looking at what is the expectation around housing and affordable housing and forecasting that may play into enrollment decisions that might result in immigration into our community. So that's ongoing. Bill Smith will be meeting again with me and with city folks, and then we'll schedule him back into you. But the majority of this work is to inform our forward future. And again, as John alluded, it's the 2020, what does that look like for us? And we look at program sustainability, facility upkeep, financial commitments. All of those really need to get weighed in. And I'm going to be honest with you, trying to get it into the finest detail to the forward future is difficult. But, I'm feeling like, and I think, Dan's up, Dan said this before, we got to start somewhere. And we'll always be able to correct forwardly the information and our assumptions made previously. And so we're in that process. Within the next, couple board meetings, you'll be seeing 2020, and you'll be able to look at that timeline and be seeing some things that become very real, and in some cases, maybe surprising, but, again, we have to really think, about moving forward. Again, you won't be surprised, but, I want to make, the public aware of some of the things we're trying to think about as we enter into those 2020 and beyond years. So, other things specific, again, their work on the financial stewardship piece, I think, has been really important in recognizing those financial commitments, leases, and things of that nature, which will really, really help us understand what we have available from the monetary perspective. So I don't know, John, anything else that you wanted to highlight? Again, this was, the purpose of this in this committee was to have about 3 or 4 updates along the
Well,
way.
Three updates to the board. but-
Right, so this was,
Yeah.
this was very prescribed, that this group, we wanted just to give you a little snippet of where we are. And we have a couple more planned throughout, so that's where we are.
David, does the group have any kind of vision toward those kinds of significant projects that might become sort of foundation worthy, given that we've talked about that recently? I know I heard, I don't remember if it was on the news, but for instance, some of the visioning that's being done with the Burlington School District is actually looking at utilization of the Moran plant facility, which I had not heard before, as a high school location. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of those sort of really future visionary type things that might look at, you know, school consolidations or new brick and mortar, or, you know, significant technology investments. Are those under consideration?
Yeah, you know, I think as they get out to the 2020, that's kind of what I meant by, you know, surprising maybe. I don't want to say shocking, but, you know, those are the things that I think we're going to need to do. And I'm going to propose some of those, you know, around, you know, looking at the consolidation, looking at expanded opportunities, but in a much more efficient way, looking at utilization of things different in the city than what we're currently doing, looking at partnering with, you know, neighboring schools, Burlington and CVU and Essex, et cetera. You know, those are ideas that maybe will become opportunities. I think the hybrid learning models are something that we'll talk more about, where you're going to see, you know, students may be in a classroom 1 day a week, and then online learning through an online management system 2 days, 2 remaining days in the week. It could be dialed into higher education. Our outreach with our business partners and UVM and St. Mike's that we've done are interested players, so I think there's some options there too. So those are definitely out there, you know, as well as our own configuration of our own schools. We have 3 elementary schools. We have pushes going on with City Center and the airport, and then we'd have a single elementary school out on the southern side. You know, does it make sense to look at consolidation? Does it make sense to have our high school become an elementary school and then have a new high school? And so there's a variety of things that, you know, I think are possible. You got to have the discussion. You got to have, you know, enough gumption to put some of those ideas out there for people to provide the feedback. But I can't think of a more exciting place either. We have a lot of exciting things going on in South Burlington with a city center that's undeveloped, and, you know, some of the current, you know, situations that we have, you know, as a school district. So again, the idea here is to be methodical and mindful and timely. What I know of in our past is that typically, you know, a budget is built, you know, starting essentially September, you know, through November. And that just doesn't, you know, allow for effective change. And if we're gonna do anything, you've gotta get way out ahead of that in a much more timely way. And this is you know, an opportunity or an idea to try to do that, so.
And who is Bill Smith?
Bill Smith is, he has been an individual since 1980, is a kind of a economist, statistician guy who's just had a personal love for numbers and has been doing enrollment projections for just about any community you can imagine. And he is very much in on, you know, just studies all of the main players. He's done it for a number of years, and he very much plots his accuracy, you know, levels, and has been excellent. So
Actually, for many years, Bill did a projection for this district and came to the board and presented that projection. Obviously, I don't think it's something that's happened during your term, but.
You know, when John came on, John Everett, you know, he very much enjoyed, you know, that specific look, and to John's testament, his work has been very good, but it's been also good during this hiatus period now to have Bill go in and put in the same model and say where he would have fallen out. So we have kind of a double check system on accuracy. As John alluded to earlier, some of the unknowns though right now are around choice, and some of those, you know, with legislative changes, where are we at with that, and what can that number look like? And So,
David, you also addressed a concern I had I've seen several of Bill's presentations, and he does a great job. He also tends to be, history is the best predictor of the future, and I think bringing in some of that qualitative information, like choice,
Mhm.
like the affordable housing initiatives within the city, those all can have an impact up or down
yeah.
on enrollment, so.
So again, that will be interesting. Again, Kevin Dorn is agreeable to do that. He'll involve some of his other city staff people, but again, that I think is a big part of the equation. So again, just letting you know that. I was unable to meet with them the last time, but again, I know that the group is ongoing and very much appreciative of all their work.
Rich, can I go back on one
I guess
agenda
so.
item? Sorry, I didn't know, is there gonna be an action required on this Act 156 grant?
I don't think there's an action. We're not the fiduciary of it. I think there may be an action in the future meetings. Again, allow you the opportunity to read it, just that you're a collaborative partner. I think has been the desire by this grant, or whatever you want to call it. Again, there's been a number of folks that have signed on to it. So I would rather that the board at the next meeting have the opportunity just to, support the cause in a more formal way. But you didn't have this information. It's come to you in what I'll say, different rounds or different iterations, and I think it'd be good for you to have the opportunity to review it. So the short answer is I would like your support for this. I think other school boards have not necessarily done that. They've been informed, and the superintendent has signed off on it.
Well, there's a board vote date that's listed on page 1. That's why I asked if there was action being required.
Yeah, so I don't have the dates in which they did that. I've heard that not all boards have necessarily adopted it in the same way,
So the difference
and
in
when would have to weigh in on that.
presenting this grant to us tonight versus the last time is just that we are no longer
The
providing any of the
fiduciary,
work.
The fiscal agent, right? Yep.
Okay.
Well, I guess my question is,
John.
if,
Sorry,
go ahead,
Elizabeth.
go ahead, John.
The intent was to present this, so you had plenty of time to ask questions, and it would be on the June 5th meeting for acceptance. That's what,
Yeah, for you to basically weigh in on it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Again, I'm.
It's not listed as an action item for tonight.
no, not tonight.
Right. I just simply put it on there for you to be informed, and I was less clear about your signing on it. It appears that it probably, I feel like it would make sense that you do adopt it, and it appears that the grant says that.
All right, if there's nothing else on future financial planning tonight, that would take us to board development policy D6, harassment of employees, 8th reading. I think we have a new draft tonight.
Yeah, and so this draft, when we last looked at it, we really went back to the attorney and asked for it really just to comply totally with what the law needed to do. So this represents a pretty significant change. So you aren't gonna see red line or overstrike or any of that, because it's really rewritten. And so it really just speaks to the unlawful harassment of students, but does not, go into any great detail on the unlawful staff and student interactions. So this is,
So we've not read this, correct?
not read this.
So
This
we're
is-
not in a position
Can
to
we
do this
read it?
8th reading.
Yeah.
Before we do anything on it?
Yeah, and again, this
That's
kinda
probably a
happened,
prudent thing to do.
and it can, we can go for, I'm not really going for too many records on number of readings, but
Well, this can't count as the 8th reading, I wouldn't think today, since we're not.
But you have it, and again, this is what this represents. We've taken out all of the previous, and this is, again, has attorney review.
So was this based on the draft that we most recently saw?
This is really a redraft, from my understanding. Again, I had Wynn working on this today. He worked on it with the attorney. They looked at the redraft that was significant enough that they took a lot of that out and just put the, the new language.
Could,
New
could,
language in.
could you, even though it might be messy, I'd like to see a red line strikeout version.
Wherever
That'd be
there's
good.
anything that's in there.
Yeah, just, I mean, so we can see what was struck or
Mhm.
added from the most recent draft that we saw.
It'll be a mess.
This
Yeah.
is
It may be
totally
a
But it may be
different now.
revealing.
But, yeah,
It may be
Or we
misstep.
could, or that may not be the most efficient way to do it. It may be that this whole block was, is all new and this is, a piece of this. Because there's definitely gonna be words and phrases that are, similar or the same.
well, I just,
But it was
Give
more
it a
prudent to
shot.
just rewrite it as it,
sure, no, I don't have a problem with that, it's just that I don't wanna have the two papers side by side trying to compare it when it can be done electronically, even if it is a little messy. If that could just be emailed to us.
just to have the, if we can redline it, is that,
Should be,
Or have a compare function done. It's the
compare
same-
function,
comes to the
whatever,
same
yeah,
result.
yeah.
Compare the two documents electronically. Are there any other comments about this policy this evening? When we're agreed, we're not gonna try and take it
Right,
out.
yeah,
Save
time to digest.
So we will go to a ninth reading.
Well,
well,
are we counting this as 8?
I wouldn't count this.
I wouldn't
as
really,
being-
because you just have
I
gotten it
mean,
on
all it means to me that it says that it's been read is that it was taken up.
No.
We don't actually read them aloud. That takes us to item 9, executive limitations policy monitoring action. And we have an executive limitations monitoring report summary for 2.1 and for 2.2. Let me ask the board, how do you want to proceed with this? You want to review this sort of detail policy by detail policy, or have people had a chance to look at it sufficiently to say we're ready to answer the questions?
I don't think we need to look at it detail by detail, since we've done that several times and
Mhm.
just go right to the change. And I just wanted to raise an issue, and I hate to keep bringing this up, but by striking unlawful discrimination, I mean, is that, I understood we were talking about that as one possible fix for the issue. Do we need to have a policy somewhere explaining, for most of it would be, with unlawful discrimination, would be in hiring practices, but it could also be in promotion practices and such. Do we actually need a policy for that, or can we just go by the fact that that's illegal? And that's not one of the things that we need to have a policy that we're instructing our staff and teachers about that concept. And,
So are you addressing a particular point
yeah, well,
on policy 2.1?
yeah, this is the big change, I
Yeah.
think, that we
Page
have
2.
from our previous, and this
Where
is what we've been.
where is the point you're
Page
addressing?
2.
Page 2.
It's in
Page
page
2,
2,
yeah.
and
2 of
we
5.
struck the unlawful discrimination of protected classes. And the reason why it was struck is that there is no policy that we have, and this is where this whole 8, 9 readings started from.
This is really
Uh,
on Pietro's advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes it,
Well, that's
we're subject to more liability if we do this,
well,
basically.
no, not unlawful discrimination. What we've been talking about is an expansion of the concept of unlawful harassment.
Right.
Originally, I suggested that we needed to either, get rid
Strike
of
it,
discrimination as one of these things that we need to talk or tell the teachers and staff about, or we need to write it into the unlawful harassment, or we need a policy. And then, so we started down the road of trying to have unlawful harassment and unlawful discrimination in the policy, and we won't go over the history of how we came to the 9th reading. But I don't know that we need to have, I mean, my understanding is there's not a dictate that says that we have to have an unlawful discrimination policy like there is for harassment.
Correct.
And is it not sufficient that there are the laws that prevent, or prohibit, I should say?
I think there is, if you think back at the executive limitations, and I don't know if it's in 2.1 and 2.2 or not. I don't remember where it is. But compliance with the law is also policy of the district.
Right.
So that in that broadest sense, it's covered.
It
And
just
we have
seems,
procedures in place where we talk of, where our, our annually with new employees, these are things that we cover.
but are you
but-
talking about unlawful discrimination in the context of, be it hiring or promotion?
Right, and so that there's, but that was what was put in there in evidence, and it was, because we don't have a specific policy on it, then it can't really be part of the evidence, and so, we recognize that we need to be mindful of how to help employees understand, what's appropriate and what's not, and to make sure that they're aware and they're held accountable. However, it's more restrictive if we have it here. So again, that was kind of the mindset. And again, you, I think, have eloquently highlighted that for us over the period.
So if you look at 2.2, that's what you're talking about. Martin, you're talking about 2.2, page 205, and striking the evidence relating to unlawful discrimination of protected classes. And I would say this, from the perspective of monitoring what our existing policies are, this could go either way. I mean, you could put this in as evidence by saying, in the broadest sense, it is the policy of the district to comply with the law. This is an element of the law that relates to our recruitment of staff, so you could say, yes, it belongs there. You could say, we don't need to go into that level of detail. You could say, we're not happy with our policies because they don't specifically prohibit discrimination, and say, we're gonna change our policies to specifically prohibit illegal discrimination. Some people would say, you don't need to do that, it's redundant.
Right.
Some people would say, you do need to do that, it's an appropriate symbol of the district's commitment. We have choice. I guess that's all I would say, we have choices about how we do this.
Well, again, if you have evidence that's coming back to you that there's a significant problem with employee-related issues, then
Yes.
it may warrant that we look more closely as a result of complaints which are being received, that we put some more specifics in and come up with a policy that says, you gotta do something about this, superintendent, it's not, currently, again, it's not a problem, from the specific evidence that we have received. So I would say that, again, I don't wanna say no, never, but that's kinda where I'm at with it. Again, this is not easy, I get it, this is not easy work to include or exclude important issues like this. So, again,
Well, let me ask this then. Are there either procedures, not official policies like the harassment policy, or is there during staff orientation or orientation of administrators, is unlawful discrimination covered? Is it addressed?
I would say yes, it is. There's always more we can do. We can do it more frequently. I think it is covered. We do it with new employees, we do it with new administrators. But, there's always more we can do, particularly if I'm getting the feeling that people are not understanding, the issues. And there's either workplace issues that are popping up or, community-related issues that are popping up that we would need to focus on. And I probably wouldn't differ in other areas that, would warrant me having a more focused attention.
Well, maybe another way of looking at this is, I guess it's just I'm a little uncomfortable with just striking everything about discrimination. It kind of suggests that we don't care about unlawful discrimination, which isn't the case.
Yeah.
But the problem, getting to the crux of the problem is that the way this has been set up before, this policy, this monitoring, has been, I give these policies and we acquaint our staff with the policies, the written materials, et cetera. Now, if in fact there are either procedures or even an orientation where this particular prohibition against unlawful discrimination is discussed, the laws are referred to or whatever, that's a different kind of evidence than what you've offered so far. If you can tell us that, in detail policy number 3, fail to acquaint staff with their protections under this policy, if you here can tell us, as for discrimination, unlawful discrimination, we tell the staff, the administrators about the law, and something more eloquent than that. But I mean, rather than just saying we give them the materials. And it's another way to make it very clear that this is one of the factors that we want to prohibit, but it's not through having a written formal policy. It's having these procedures and the fact that we have all sorts of federal laws and state laws that cover this. Is that?
Yeah, again, I've been wishy-washy on both sides. I mean, I had the evidence in, I had it included, We've taken it out to be a little bit, less specific, but adherent to kind of our work and what I would say my interpretation of appropriately informing, and orienting new staff. So.
Well, I guess I see where he went with this, because I think maybe I suggested
Again,
as much. But I think the real problem, looking again at 2.5, from what I'm hearing from what you're telling about procedures and about
Yeah.
acquainting the staff and about references to the federal, state law, whatnot, the big problem is that it says the policy is provided in writing to all employees. That's what's not
striking
done.
that.
Well, no, I know, but I don't want to strike the whole fact that the fact that unlawful discrimination is one of the things
He
that
took
we're
that
trying
out
to
of
prevent.
out of his interpretation, though.
Well, I understand, and that is problematic as
And
well.
I'll just admit to this, I told him to do this at the end of the last meeting based on what you were
Right,
saying.
right, no, that's what I'm saying, and,
Well, it was a
it's
lengthy discussion.
Perhaps.
So there's a question here for the board to think about in terms of
Mr.
what it
Brown.
is we want the superintendent to do.
Yeah,
First thing I would say is that the superintendent is entitled to adopt any reasonable interpretation he wishes of the policies. That's our idea. The interpretation that he adopted of our policies was that unlawful discrimination on protected classes is forbidden. That strikes me as a very reasonable interpretation for him to adopt, and I would certainly be supportive of his adopting that. Martin points out that since we don't have a policy statement, a board policy statement, prohibiting discrimination, that the evidence isn't correct, if that's the interpretation of the policy. I think that's where we are, and that's where we ought to be. That is to say, we ought to support a reasonable interpretation by the superintendent, which says, not only is it illegal, we don't support it, we're against it, and if that piece of evidence, if it's not accurate, should be left out.
so you mean leave that line about unlawful discrimination in the interpretation?
Sure.
But take it out? of
But
the
take
reference.
out the policy is provided in writing to all new employees.
Right.
But
It may
Mark-
be that the superintendent wishes to adopt a practice of informing all of our employees of this. In fact, I think he should, but I don't know that that's what we do, and so we have to ask that question at the right time, which,
Well, I think that question's been answered. I mean, Martin, what you asked is what is being done, and it sounds like in,
Training.
employee orientation and with staff and administrators, the laws are reviewed that prohibit unlawful discrimination, regardless
really
of
just a
whether
matter
it's
of the language.
policy. Yeah,
That's
Is
not a written policy is provided. It's as part of orientation.
right.
The appropriate staff or
Mm-hmm.
administrators are made aware of this prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be sufficient,
Mm-hmm.
since it didn't work in trying to draft it into a policy. Does that
are we
make
at a
sense?
consensus? And if we are, let me try and
Summarize.
summarize it, and then we'll find it if we're there, okay? Are we in agreement that we think it's a reasonable interpretation for the superintendent to state that unlawful discrimination of protected classes is a wrongful condition that the district does not permit?
Yes.
Yes, we're in agreement on that. are we in agreement that the policy, since it isn't in writing, is not being provided in writing to all new employees? So that sentence should come out.
Right.
And if it is correct, and I'll turn to David for this, that in fact, in connection with orientation of employees, the employees are provided with this information orally, that should be the evidence that should be submitted.
Agreed.
Is that where we are?
And the only thing I would just add is on detail policy number 3,
Mm-hmm.
that's really the critical place where the evidence about the fact that's orally presented
Mhm.
to the staff, that's where they have to be acquainted. It's a little less important over as far as evidence for the first policy, it's the acquainting the staff.
That makes sense. So we would, I take it, ask the superintendent and make these changes. And then we'll approve this report.
So you just like read the change?
Do you want me to summarize them again for you, Delina?
Yes, please.
So, yes, the board agrees that unlawful discrimination of protected classes is a reasonable interpretation under
Detail policy 1.
detail policy number 1, page 2 of 5.
So the red line that's you struck, put back in.
So black that red line.
You know what I'm saying? On the top of page 2,
Yeah, right.
that should be black again,
Okay.
okay?
And the question of whether the evidence of this should be presented here or in policy 3 strikes me as really up to the superintendent.
Yeah.
Martin has expressed his view that it's better in 3, but,
Well, that's where,
because of
he has
acquainting.
to acquaint staff to it.
Yep.
Right.
in some.
So,
Yep.
there could be a reference if this is still in 1, it could be cross-referenced to 3 for the evidence. And the evidence should be plainly placed in 3, and the evidence should not include the idea that we handed a policy, it should include the idea that we acquaint staff with this by training. Okay? We got it. What about 2.1?
I thought it was lovely, every bit of it.
That's refreshing.
We're not gonna do 2.2 because it's not right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're gonna do 2.1. So with respect to 2.1, we know that one board member thinks it's lovely. Actually, it's not really required in terms of approval, but I think it's more than adequate. More than adequate. And if we look at the detail policies, 1 reports compliance. Is there any objection to that? Anybody disagree with that? 2 reports compliance. Are you disagreeing with that?
Yeah, the only problem is that it cites in evidence attachment 1, and I don't have an attachment 1. Is that?
You guys got them like.
7 months ago.
Yeah, I think we
Oh,
do
okay,
that.
so as long
We've
as
had
it's
them.
actually,
Yeah, we have.
It is
in
an
the-
attachment.
okay,
Yep.
that's fine.
And I
All
think
right.
we did provide feedback, David, at the time that ends survey wasn't as
Useful now.
linked to the ends as we would like to see it in the future.
Mhm.
Right.
The survey,
Yeah.
But compliance is agreeable to all? And detail policy 3, is there any objection to the finding of compliance? I don't see any. And detail policy 4 is a violation based upon the elevator problem. I don't assume there's no objection to that. And detail policy 5 is a violation. And there's work to be done by July 1.
I just think that sentence underneath what you'll do to come into compliance, David, on detail policy 5, needs to be a little more clear in terms of consistent communication standards with parents. That's the issue. Not so much the standards, but do you know what I'm saying?
I'm happy to add that, but I interpret it.
You don't.
I have desire to come up with some standard protocols and procedures around response
Okay, so as long as we're,
Yeah, I'm happy to
I-
add, some, whatever you
are we
desire.
clear that it's response? I guess that's the issue. And this, when I read it, if I didn't have this conversation before, I wouldn't be sure
Yeah, I
it
mean,
was
I
that.
kind of put it in the communication protocol, so the protocol will be, around response time in email and voicemails and things of that
Okay.
nature, so.
Okay, that's fine.
So are you asking
Few
for a
more.
change to this, June?
Well, yeah, I guess I am.
Well, be clear, yeah.
I just think it's important that it says something about how we respond to
So
parents.
something like on communication protocols, including response time?
Yes. Yeah,
So we'll just add on including response time. We're gonna get a little bit of a concert tonight,
Yeah.
6th graders.
People who are listening on, or watching television will understand there's actually education going on in this
Mhm.
building, the school board meetings.
it's a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
David, is there any room under here for the feedback process? Having that in this section? The feedback opportunity process
Yeah,
being,
I didn't put it here specifically, but it's certainly a big part of, the feedback, yeah. So, would you like to see it in a specific area?
well,
I don't know where you're pointing.
Just evidence.
yeah, I think it would be evidence, and I think it needs to be communicated too.
Mhm.
Because we're undergoing this new way to get feedback.
Mhm.
And just so, parents know what their options are to give feedback to the district.
So you're under detail policy 5.
I'm still
Diane?
under 5, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so it sounds like 5 will need some revision. Anything else on 5?
So something on feedback, or feedback opportunity. Mhm.
There's nothing else on 5, that takes us to 6, where there's a violation report and a plan. That plan acceptable? Okay, 7, you may.
Sorry, thank you. Well, I'm looking at this, number 6, and I'm wondering, well, actually, maybe it's 7, maybe it applies to 7, the recording section.
Okay, so,
Although I'm wondering how the conversation ended up with the monitors to be on full-time.
It's locked out, sorry.
Oh, I didn't know it was locked.
It shouldn't be.
He thinks he is.
There was gonna be discussion, I don't know if I heard that or if it took place, or if that was a meeting that was canceled, I'm not sure. I know David was saying that he was having the administrators leave the recordings on full-time.
Yeah, you missed that one.
It's not the
So
recordings,
what was your,
it's not the recordings, it's the monitors.
right, the monitor.
The monitors are on, the recordings are always happening.
Right, I understand.
But it was the monitors to be on as a useful tool in the event of an emergency, that they could be viewed quickly.
And you all
So,
discussed that and felt like that was helpful, really?
again, I reported that as a violation and as a recommended change in policy, to the board. So
Okay.
that's part of why it's a violation.
My question applies to 7.
so policy 2.1 is up for reconsideration, is I think the message of the report of violation. 7, report is compliance, is there any objection or question about 7? Hearing none? Yes,
Did you all hear Wynn's interview on VPR last week?
I did not.
He did an interview on VPR, and they were talking about surveillance school-wide and just statewide and that type of thing. And so I wasn't able to listen to that because my kids had off from school, so here I was listening to it today without a rewind, stop, or fast-forward button. So just as I get to Wynn's section, it cuts off, I don't know, I malfunction. But I thought I heard him say, pretty sure I heard him say that they were so strict with the video recordings, that they had to get permission from the police to access them, that the police had to have double check to make sure that the administration was not in violation in terms of requesting to view the recordings. Is that correct?
So, just so you know,
Right.
the board doesn't, I mean, the recordings, if there's a desire to view the recording, and it's desired by the police as a result of an infraction on our properties, the police have to request that. And it has to be a request to me or a delegated individual within the central office to allow that to be released.
That was my understanding of
And
how things were,
That's
but
correct.
that's not what I heard on.
Well, I'm not, I can't
Okay.
specifically quote what Wynn said, but that is our practice, that has been our practice, and that will continue to be our practice until there's a noted change. So,
Okay.
we've been very consistent with that, we have our records that, support that, and, we've had several situations, some have happened not that long ago where we've exercised that same protocol. So,
And do they have live feed?
no one has live feed, we're the only ones who have access to that currently.
Okay, because if that were to go beyond your scope, I would be terribly afraid of
It's
the
not.
controls.
It's a password protected process, and, you can, only those that are authorized and have license to do so, and it's only, there's only, I think, 4 licenses in total, and I'm the only one authorized to go on, preserve, or a delegated individual in my absence to do that. And again, we've been really, really diligent about that and have records to support it.
Dan?
And in addition, it's a 3-day window in which that is available?
Well, I'd rather not get into the specific time frame because I think that then that walks into, informing beyond what I'd like to do to the public, but rest assured that there's a cycle of that's out there, We don't record indefinitely into the day's future. We don't just do a 1-minute record delete either. So I've thought about that question a lot, Dan, and so I've thought to myself, I want to be
Well,
smart.
I think it's important.
It's
that
written down
it's
here.
still long.
Well, and
Final
again,
sunset.
I'd rather just be sensitive to, if people want to go on and look, they could, but I'd rather not be broadcasting, specific duration. But it is, we're trying to be mindful of what's reasonable,
Kathy, I did hear most of Wynn's interview, and I think the preface to what you heard was he was distinguishing, you may know this, David, between the criteria for law enforcement to request video, and one of them is like probable cause, and then that the school criteria would be more stringent, and I forget what the phrase is.
I'm not gonna.
But he was distinguishing between the criteria that either party would use to even access the video.
Okay, yes, I was quite alarmed, thinking, that's not the way they've done things. And then I couldn't rewind it to listen again.
Well, part of that is, again, in fairness to Wynn, and, there's been a fair amount of conversation continuing around safety and security in schools, and, that has been a lot of his past as well, and so we've been a participant, and they've asked a lot of questions about what we're currently doing and how is it working in South Burlington. So we've kind of been a little bit of, on display in that regard. And if it helps other people, other schools be safe and secure and help them inform their decision forwardly, then I'm happy to do that. But again, there's a lot of other conversations, out there around, what other folks are doing in different parts of the state or the country.
Okay. So, is there any objection to the report of compliance under detail policy 7? None. That takes us to 8. Where is
Well,
it?
can I,
Yes.
just a quick one.
7?
I mean,
Back to 7.
David, given the sensitivity on this, do you want to just say that recordings are stored
Yeah.
for intermittent periods?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to be very explicit with the board, and I don't want to offend Dan either. I just have thought more about, not giving all of the information to the, to all. So I agree. Recordings are stored for a period of time to be available. Or something. I can change that.
For a limited period of time. Doesn't have to be specific what the number is to satisfy me.
Yeah.
We had a
It's good.
lot of debate about that, though, setting a specific time frame.
This
We
is
went
in the
through
evidence, not in the policy.
I don't understand, what?
This is in the evidence, not in the policy. The policy says what the policy says. All I'm saying is, I don't need the superintendent to say in reporting compliance with the policy exactly how many hours he retains those
Okay,
temps.
Yeah.
I
okay?
misunderstood what you were talking about.
We don't change policy just sitting here in a minute.
I
In
understand.
fact, sometimes it takes 9 readings. Yeah,
I know.
okay?
Look at that and change.
I mean, it's likely I could, you know, I can change that. I mean, it's important that I have, for a period of limited time, it needs to be a time frame that allows for, you know, the police to acquire it, you know? So if I find that it can be somewhat shorter, fine, but I just was, you know, I've been guided by this a little bit to not be so specific in this particular area, and that's, I think the limited terms, limited period of time is good.
Okay.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry, now I'm confused again. Back-
Policy says whatever it says, okay? The policy says, fail to limit the use of security videos, recordings to inquiries by the police about criminal investigations. And then there's the superintendent's interpretation of the policy. What we're talking about now is not the policy nor the interpretation of the policy, we're talking about the evidence that he's acting in compliance with it.
But this used to be part of the policy,
No, he can change the
Timeframe.
evidence every time we read every time we read it.
but now but that time frame is not explicit in the policy anymore.
The policy says whatever it says.
But it used to, okay.
We
but
didn't
it-
change the policy sitting here tonight.
I understand. However, I'm aware of the fact that this used to be out front, and this was a detail that we banged out. I hate
Well, you
to
wanna
have
d-
it.
We
You would've-
can't, we
you
can't
would've
bang
done
out
the
his
evidence,
evidence though, Kathy. I mean, he gets to decide what his evidence is.
No, I understand about the evidence part, but I'm just,
That's the only place what you're talking about.
I
Is it
think
That's
it
changed?
used
the
to
only
be
place it
elsewhere.
says.
I think
No.
it used to,
Well,
I'll
your
have to
question,
look
your
back at my
question is, did
paperwork.
detail policy 7, did the wording change? Did it ever include a duration?
I think it had originally been, it started out very general, this is way back, and then, they shifted things with the policy governance.
I don't believe so.
I-
It's true?
And so, now I'm realizing this has somehow been shifted out of the,
We have the policy here, right, David?
policy.
I'm going online right now. The
Okay.
policy is
See what-
different than the policy governance that you have.
Yeah, the old,
The
yeah.
policy is
The original.
Did the original have the
Yeah, but that's not
time?
what we're asking about.
No.
What we're saying is,
So do we change
what
it?
does the policy governance policy say?
yeah.
Yeah, I believe we've been consistent to this
I think what
end.
Kathy's thinking of is the actual policy on
am.
the website, which is
Yeah.
different than this.
Okay.
Huh. Yeah.
Are we still being held accountable to this stuff? No, you're saying
You're held
not.
accountable to the policy.
To which policy?
The
This-
superintendent is held accountable to the,
This
to this policy.
Right.
So what is the other?
Your other policy is former policy.
Okay.
It's not present policy.
Got it.
So how did that get shifted out? I don't recall that.
You would have to find a better historian than I to remember that detail.
Oh, I'm sure I have it somewhere.
Well, David, you've got some previous iterations, right?
I don't, I just purged my book, so I don't have the last one,
The last
so.
3.5 years, it has not changed, the policy governance.
Yeah, I don't recall it putting in there.
No, not my time, we've been pretty consistent on that.
I just think, being stored for a short period of time that's most certainly too vague.
Well,
And-
part of
and
it
how
is,
can you hold anybody accountable to that?
part of it is a fine balance between over-informing, so that individuals who wanna, who perhaps, I hope not, wanna commit and do something inappropriately, to provide way too much detail for a time limit in which that could happen.
That doesn't make sense to me. If somebody's
Two,
done something
I think
wrong-
that what we're wanting to do is to be mindful of ensuring, that in this case, we're not, being abusive of, tools at our disposal. And
But if
again,
you do not set a time frame, then how can you not be abusive? There's nothing to hold you accountable to.
They're
And
actually,
there was the reason that we set up this number was that it was reasonable without being,
I think what he's saying, Kathy, I think the disconnect is that he is setting a time frame, but he doesn't want to make that time frame public to the community, and it kind of makes sense to me.
I'm not saying the name out loud, so it's not like I'm not,
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that number out loud.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that you're being accountable to that number.
Well,
But you're not.
the board asked me, I mean, through this policy, the board requires me to have some processes in place where I don't abuse this. And again, it's to limit the use. Limiting the use of these devices is the charge by the policy. And I'm clearly interpreting that how I've set that up. And the evidence in which I've shared is that, how it gets viewed, that very much restricts it right out of the gate. That is actually what I would say the most restrictive. And then really, if that I'm having to be adhered to, then the time limit for storing the data is really irrelevant. It's that I can only give it to you, and you have to request it in order to receive it. It's really irrelevant around the time frame specifically. And so I'm just, I'm being sensitive to the amount of time in which, by telling everyone exactly what we're doing or not doing. But I do feel I'm being held accountable, and I'm stating that in the evidence that through the process, I have record and can show you every time that it's been accessed and who's requested it at that time. So it's.
How do we know you won't be keeping these for a year? How do we know you won't be keeping these for 6 months? I mean, without it being specified.
Well, this is again, it can go back into the police force ability to investigate a process. They can't, there's time limits that they have too to appropriately investigate a situation. So, there's a lot of things at play here.
But again, it goes back to the fact that this was initiated as a crisis tool, not a surveillance tool. And that's why that window was set up, was to make sure it was being used as a crisis tool and not a surveillance tool.
And I'm not disagreeing. I mean, it is a crisis tool. It's an available resource that helps us to keep this property safe.
Well, let me say this. My own view is that this policy is unduly restrictive. And if this board is going to take it up again and consider it again during my tenure on this board, it will be less restrictive than it is now, because frankly, I think your privacy concerns are appropriate, but are outweighed by the potential good that surveillance can do for this district in terms of the security of these children. So they're both important considerations from my perspective. The policy does not say that we only keep the tapes for a specified number of hours or days. If it said that in the past, you're welcome to point that out to us. And if we've changed the policy without going through our process, then we need to change it back. I'll give you that. But if we're going to take this policy up again, I think we should take it up from top to bottom, because I think it's too restrictive. That's my view. So, we're not talking about the policy tonight. We're talking about the evidence the superintendent has offered to persuade this board that he is in compliance with Detail Policy 7, which is that he shall not fail to limit the use of security video recordings to inquiries by the police about criminal investigations. And what I hear the board saying is that it's not necessary from our perspective to require that a particular number of days or hours be specified. If members of the board disagree with that, they should speak up. We certainly understand your point of view. I certainly understand your point of view. I respect it, even though I don't agree with it. Is there any objection to the superintendent's suggestion that he would take the number of days out, the number of hours out of the evidence that's offered? I don't hear any. With that, I think we need to go on. That was Detail Policy 8, or that was 7? Mm-hmm. Detail Policy 8 is a report of compliance. Is there disagreement about compliance on this policy?
Nope.
And we obviously can't take up the overall policy because we have some changes to make. Okay? That takes us to nutritional services report and discussion. We have a written report, you do at your place, and then, do we have a presentation as well?
We don't, but John, was prepared to answer some questions. Maybe we'll give you a little bit of an overview of what you have in front of you, and I'll ask John to do that for me. Again, this was in part of the directive that I shared with the board around the move forward objective, to know kind of where we are, and then
Thanks, Joanne.
as we move forward. Good night, Joanne, thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.
And as we move forward, to have more cyclic information provided to nutrition service. So with that said, John, would you mind maybe just give them a short version of what's here? Obviously, you can probably, everybody's gone to the bottom line already by now, but maybe John, can you give a little overview for me?
The business office and nutritional services are making a concerted effort to take a whole volume of data and put it into a report that can be counted on, consistent, and shows trends, shows things that even opens problems, and shows things that could be addressed or need to be addressed. And the volume of information that's kept in nutritional services on a daily basis is pretty overwhelming, and that's something that we're gonna work on in the future, to try to decipher that. We've also, in my office, the accountant Sue Spear is now responsible for the accounting of the reports, and I've been teaching her what I know, and trying to get information, trying to utilize the information we have from nutritional services. So she actually did the projection this year for year end based on where we are now, and it's coming out about the same as last year as far as a loss of $134,000 this year. Added to last year's deficit, projects $482,000 at year end. And that's a significant problem. We have some guidance from the state on how to handle that from the budget, and we were directed to get some information, or legal opinion on how best to do that. So with this latest projection, we'll go forth with to get that legal opinion. So there's no questions to be answered as we get into the budget this year is what we're gonna do. I thought it was important to see what student participation in lunches and our free and reduced population, just to see that, and that's the second section. The participation overall is 48.9% for lunch and 9.38% for breakfast. And you see it by school there, with Chamberlain being the highest at 58%, and Orchard interestingly at 37%. Breakfast is 9.38%. Now, one thing I could have put in here, but I neglected to, was compare this to what we were doing in October. So if you look at the breakfast participation in October was 5.92%, and lunches was 41%. So, and the high school took a big hit in the early fall because of nutrition requirements, federal nutrition requirements. Kids just weren't getting enough to eat, so they left. I'm gonna try to keep this simple tonight, but I believe that with that information in hand, you see that April's participation is quite a bit higher at the high school. And so with the breakfast participation has gone up quite a bit.
John, can I just make a comment on that? That breakfast participation is because we started requiring kids to purchase a full breakfast now. We've been selling that many breakfasts for years. We just have not been selling it as a meal. They've been buying it a la carte, so that was just a subtle shift, and you now have to purchase a whole meal. So instead of paying $1.75 for a breakfast sandwich, you're now paying $1.85 and getting a whole meal, which means that we get 50 cents back per
On the
meal
food.
from the federal government.
And I do think that on the lunch, the 41% that happened in October for the high school. To get that up to almost 50%, shows some of the effort that's gone on at the high school. One other thing I wanted to do was show a 4-year look at the trends by school, and that's on page 2. The high school selling about 450 meals a day, and that compares favorably with 2010 of 445. There are changes in enrollment that would affect this a little bit, but I'm not sure if that's real significant. But at this point, these are actual numbers. But if you look at Chamberlain, I think the middle school is the most change, is down 22%, or over 1,000 meals less per day than were being sold in 2010. Orchard, 16% less, Central 21% less, and Chamberlain 13% less. And these are habits, just thinking about what that means, these are habits that parents and children have as far as, okay, are they sending lunch in at the elementary, or are they buying lunch? And if they're not buying it in the elementary, are they buying it at the middle school, or they continue to send lunch in? So it's a little disturbing looking at this as it gets up to the high school, but it can be changed. But I think that's an important trend to keep an eye on, how this is going year over year and month over month. And finally, the last section on page 3 just shows where we've been in the last 7 years and what our projection is for the year in 2013. We had a price increase this year of almost 7%, so our revenue is up insignificantly from what it was last year. So that's an indication of decreased participation. The other expenses the operating expenses are down a little bit from last year, and salaries and benefits are up by about $25,000. And part of that was the wage increases and the increase in health insurance from over the last years. So that's the news for the end of fiscal 13.
So John, what's the why on the decreased participation? I mean, that's 2,400 meals a day difference between 2010 and 2013 approximately.
The why is part of it is the nutritional guidelines that came into play this year, but it's not a trend. I look back at October of comparison, and our trend from October went from 51% participation district-wide for lunch to 45% last year to 41% this year. So it's student and parent preferences. We hadn't raised prices significantly, if at all, for 3 years until this year. So
Well, I guess, I mean, you know, what I've heard is we've done all these things to revamp the menus to make them more appealing to kids and included kids in menu selections and things like that. So that just seems counterintuitive to me.
and I
Yeah,
can't really comment on that part of it.
Well, part of
from the
it
financial
is-
side, but
part of it is, and I said this before, I mean, we haven't provided the data to the nutrition service staff and to the administrators that surround the students and staff themselves around our current counts. I mean, I think that when you know there's a certain meal that's desirable, that's liked and healthy and of interest, it would behoove us to make sure that we get, a number of those meals planned in the course of a month. And, Irene has done this at the high school, quite honestly, with, and I'm not gonna get this all right, but opening up the pasta that's very popular, and it's a reimbursable meal, and it's very much of an interest. So that's in part and play, I would say, why the high school has maintained, some of that. But we haven't provided
I haven't provided the level of detail to the nutrition service staff to say,
You don't think
Well-
somebody notices 1,000 meals less a day?
a day, I don't think that, when
I
you're,
don't think
it's not a day, it's in the
for-
course of the year.
It's a month, I believe.
Or a month, right?
Those are
Yeah.
Those are monthly
Monthly,
figures, okay,
yeah.
1,000 a month.
Still.
I think I can answer that. I think that I'm very detailed. I have an accounting degree, and so I'm into numbers. So at the high school, I take all the lunch numbers and I look very carefully at which meals are increasing our overall count, and not just, oh, this is popular. I'm shifting numbers from the deli today to the main meal. So I look at what increases, and I think it probably needs to be done district-wide. But I think there's also some administrative issues. I hear from a lot of parents of little kids that they don't have enough time to eat by the time they get through the lunch line, and I think that's something we need to look at. So I don't think it's all in what we're serving. I don't think it's all in the price. I think there's a lot of factors.
Distractions, lunch, we've changed some,
Recess.
changed some times, we have, there's pieces that we've changed in certain places, and I think, again, we have to be really mindful. We know that kids need nourishment in order to be in the best possible environment to learn, and this is telling data that we gotta get on top of. And again, this is part of the need for the review, more regular review of this information.
Well, it
It is what it is.
frightens me that I see these numbers at the same time that I hear a lot of emphasis on providing more healthy food to our students. Because there is a obvious conclusion that could be drawn from that, which is they don't like more healthy food, and they're not gonna eat more healthy food. And that's gonna mean that if that's what's really going on, that what we're gonna do is we're gonna continue to see these numbers unless we do something very different. I hope that that's not the right diagnosis, but I would say to the superintendent and to our nutrition services people, we need to understand the problem to deal with it. And if that's the problem, I'm not saying that the answer is we just do what's popular with students, but I'm saying we surely need to understand that.
Well, the implementation of healthy foods is not a new one.
No, it's
Certainly
not
there's,
new.
but within the last 5 years, there's been a major push on,
Yep.
healthy, more nutritious, more locally sustainable, food movement. And, it's like anything, if there's an implementation, where we need to be mindful of is tracking the implementation of it and communicating it more broad with moms and dads and guardians who are the, again, they're with their children 99%, a large chunk of the time. And so it's really hard to change that culture when, what's being supplied to them at home and what's being supplied at school. If there's a significant disconnect, then it's really hard to move that. So, that is in part in play what's upon us, but it's our job to educate and inform, not just the students, but also the parents around how important nutrition is to the outcome in education. And, I think we're doing okay there, but obviously not well enough. And the new federal mandates that have come down on all of us, not saying they're bad, but there's requirements, and we've lived through a few of them, just recently.
Diane?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said, Irene. I hadn't even considered that process kind of issue versus the food itself, but if you're a parent of a young child and you don't think you have a long time to eat, and you can get through the line or not even go in the line with a bag lunch, then you're not gonna participate in the hot lunch. But that had never occurred to me. I just had a question about the new guidelines that will make free lunch available for children who receive reduced lunch, and what financial impact that might have on the district, and participation possibly for kids who might not have.
We think we're gonna see an uptick in the numbers, and we'll see an increase on the return.
When does it take effect?
I'm not exactly sure when that new law is. Do you, John? Have an idea?
I
I'm
think
not.
it's soon, but
Typically, the new statutes are effective July 1st.
Okay.
So we should.
But I don't know what this particular statute says.
but some specificity to Diane's question. If you look at the reduced lunch percentage, at least from April, Central School, there's 1%, 0.86% of the kids that would affect. And at the high school, it's 3.3%, so it's,
That's what
we'll be able to measure it. It's not as much as the free, obviously, but free side of things.
Is it too soon to tell whether some of the changes that were made, that were recommended by the team to improve participation have had an impact yet?
Well, I think Irene's school is a good example. I think as a result of her work, and I think the external and internal groups of this recent process resulted in, hey, deli, and let's make it a reimbursable meal. Let's offer one more thing, and it's a reimbursable meal, has been a major turnaround and helped with participation. The deli, help me if I got this wrong, but opening back up Caf 3, opened up participation, allowed for a little bit more, and kids aren't going out as much, right, if I have that right?
And I'm gonna tell you, with the heat last week, our numbers, or not 2 weeks ago, our numbers should have dropped down and they were up. So this doesn't even reflect the May's numbers with our pasta bar. I think April, we did 1 week of pasta bar, so our numbers I predict will be up. Our lunch counts are up about 25 to 50 meals a day at the high school with the opening of the pasta bar. And it's what the kids want. You've gotta, when they come in and they eat lunch and they say they're still hungry, they're not gonna pay $3.50 for a meal. And I gotta say, at the beginning of this school year, the elementary school kids were not happy with their meals. They weren't getting enough food. We had principal call us and say, don't serve this meal at our school if this is the portion you're allowed to give. So I think that some of these things we're trying to recuperate from those nutritional guidelines. I had a trainer tell me at one of the trainings that I went to this year that we're trying to change the diet of American children through nutritional services. Yeah. But we all know if you have kids that you can't just say go from point A to point B and start eating, kale chips from Doritos. It's not going to work. It has to be baby steps. And they wanted us to just make one giant leap and change their diets at school. And I think part of these number decreases are from that. And it takes a while to get them to come back. You lose 1 kid or 10 kids, and it takes a long time to get them back in.
Out of curiosity, do we share participation numbers or targets even with our students?
We haven't in the past, and that's been part of, I think, some of the desire of the work is to involve, our student, councils, particularly high school, middle school, but even have it as a discussion at, in the elementary schools that, we're looking and informing parents that, these are the meals, a little bit more on the marketing side, a little bit more on the nutrient side and how it connects to learning. So those are definitely some things that we know we have to do. And, I stand by what I said to the board is that, number one, more regular information available to the nutrition service staff, a time period to make some of the changes with, come back to the board with, where we are. But again, I do believe, we're in the process of hiring a new director, and, I feel that, things can be positive. A lot of it is very specific to behaviors, that come to us in kids and with moms and dads and guardians that follow them. So I
think there's a logistical piece that's pretty easy that you may be missing as well, which is like when the kids are younger, or before we went electronic and the weekly principal letter came home, in the backpack, there was a lunch meal, a menu that got put up on everybody's board, and you kind of looked at it Sunday night and said, so what days do you want to have hot lunch? And that doesn't exist anymore. Or if it does, you have to really search for it. And so I just wonder.
Well, those visible things in the market, those are some of the things we've talked about. And so, it's in the electronic world, it's unpopular, but, we've talked about, how to do that marketing and how to help moms and dads connect to it. And so you're right.
Maybe it should be a menu in the other paper every week, I don't know, but.
Well, we've typically had information in the other paper. I don't know that has had as much take, but here again, we need to ask, how can we be better help to you informing your decisions at home?
And the other thing that we feel is really important in our department that we haven't figured out yet is we make a lot of stuff from scratch. If you ask anybody in our community, they don't know that.
Mhm.
They don't know that all of our pasta sauces and all our breads and all of these things are homemade, and I think that's something we have to do, because I think if you know as a parent that you're paying $3.50 or $2.55 or whatever the lunch prices are for a homemade meal, you're more likely to do it than if you think we're opening up a can of spaghetti sauce and dumping it in. And I've talked to so many people in the community that said, oh, you make your sauces from scratch? And we're trying to figure out how to get that information to the community.
So that's a little marketing
It is,
technique issue. You know.
but I think that will help the numbers too.
Yeah, the other piece I hear is I think we're still guessing at why participation is down.
Yeah.
And I think you have some great observations, but I don't think they're documented yet as to
Right.
sort of, are they the top 3 or 4 things that are driving participation down in every school? Are they different in each school? So that, I mean, to me, we need to know that before we can even control it or market to it.
Well, I mean, it is interesting when you look at some of this cross-school comparisons,
Mhm.
and you say, you know, Central's only doing 3% breakfasts, and the other elementary schools are, you know, higher, a lot higher. Well, does that provide us with a place to look and ask why?
Yeah.
You know, is there a difference in the food we're serving? Is there a difference in the marketing we're doing? Is there a difference in the kids we're serving? I don't know.
Well, and absolutely, I think all those, and in some cases, and somebody said this, it's sometimes, you know, the time that it takes to eat it, the time it takes to go get it, you know, to consume it. I mean, and for me, you know, in my time, we had similar situation in elementary school. We turned it into a bag breakfast where you come in off the bus that, you know, that lets you into that entrance, and you're able to have 2 choices on your bag breakfast, and you could eat it in your classroom. And if you don't eat it, if you're not allowed to eat it in your classroom, you know, we saw the participation go way down.
Yeah.
And so, you know, little things like that, and we're gonna be exploring, you know, some of these options, as well as the options in which, you know, the nutrition service director comes in.
And presumably the director is the person that's asking those questions and guiding that,
Yeah.
that strategizing, so. Anything else on nutrition services?
Just a quick one, not to state the obvious, but we're at a $500,000 deficit now, so.
It's not good. It's not good. We agree on that, I think.
Well,
Bad.
it's gotten worse.
Yeah, it's getting worse.
Since we've had these conversations.
So when are we getting, I
So
missed
do we
when
stop
we're getting
talking
the
about
opinion of the attorney, John,
Well, and how to carry the
and
debt.
how to deal with the debt.
I think we should have it by the second meeting in June.
Oh, okay.
That's, I think that's been an expectation.
I would very much hope that's the case. Okay. That takes us to the agenda for June 5. And I know I have the draft agenda here someplace. Are there things that should come off or things that should go on?
Do we want to, actually I had a couple of questions. One is, should we have a legislative update? There was a lot of action that came out of the last legislature that impact education or may impact education going forward. I wonder if it would make sense to add that somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like to make it a separate item, or if you'd like me to just put it in my report and have a report that, you know, you can read. It's, if you'd like a more deliberate conversation that is available to the public to come and share, or even a legislative guest that might wanna come, you know, might be better. Your choice. Separate item? Or
Question
embedded
of
in-
time, I think.
Yeah, we already have 2 administrative reports back.
I mean, I will tell you what my expectation would be is, you know, that I would include some of the same, you know, legislative information and provide you just you know, what action happened as a result, and some of the new legislative actions that are out there.
I'm wondering if we should consider inviting Steve Dale to give that update, because also the VSBA is looking for resolutions, and maybe at the same time just soliciting from him sort of what's on the docket for resolutions, because we haven't really had that discussion either.
I think that would be great if he's available, or someone for the staff.
We may need to be a little flexible about what date
Yeah.
we'll put that on for. It has to be a date he can come for. But
Well,
I think it would
nonetheless,
be- I think it would be a great idea to have Steve
Mhm.
come and talk with us about it.
Mhm.
But if there's,
Kathy?
oh, I'm sorry, just real quick, if
That's
there's
right.
gonna be a report, if there's gonna be a report from David, if you could specifically tell us what effects certain legislation would have on the district, because I've kind of seen what the legislation is, but I don't know what
Yeah.
the effects are.
Our student representatives are looking very
I was
Hawaiian.
just saying, I just
Oh,
said, I
right.
think they've been having way more fun than us.
well, I'm happy to add that on. I think maybe I'd still just, we'll put a little update in my report, and we'll work to get Steve Dale
Great.
scheduled at a time if possible. We can-
Kathy, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if this is coming up with the item number 12, the future agenda items. It is the same thing you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Close
Um,
enough.
Well, I'm wondering why so many of these are going to be discussed at the board retreat as opposed to an open school board meeting. And I know
The
you're
board
gonna tell me
retreat will be an
board
open school
retreat
board
is
meeting.
open meeting, I know, but it's kind of at a,
Well, it's
not,
just, I mean, the board's been working to try to get a variety of, I mean, at times when there's a new item, we add it under those future items,
right,
and that list has grown long, and so
Right.
part of the desire is to take some of them off, put them into the retreat, still open public meeting, and try to, work through those.
right.
As opposed to just continuing to carry them, on future agenda items. It's certainly,
It just, I thought the retreat was for board education, and this is sort of, these are pretty,
It's not for board education, it's really for getting through our list.
is it?
Yeah, so you can come.
Oh, I know, it's Saturday, right? I'm sure I
You're
can.
welcome.
no, it's not Saturday, June
Is it?
3rd.
Oh,
It's
it's
Monday.
Okay, yeah.
Is
Well, so it's
RETN,
interesting.
RETN is, as far as I know, we're gonna have them. I don't know that we
No.
have solidified whether they can or not
No.
yet.
It's a special meeting if we want to
We
pay
can,
for them to come.
I don't think so.
they've been great, RETN, for coming and being available to us, so.
We really
I
try
think
to
the plan
do
is we
all
try
our
to have them,
meetings
yeah.
with them.
Yeah,
so.
this is lots of stuff
Yeah.
we're covering that.
It is a lot of stuff.
I mean, retreat is kind of a misnomer, Kathy, really. It's just that we're gonna have a longer session and try and get through some more stuff. And I think if you think about the other alternative, it's to do something like meet every week for a while, which is very burdensome for everybody. So, that's the.
So specific to the June 5th meeting.
Yes.
Because actually that legislative update would have been nice for June 5th, but I think we can be flexible on the date and we'll get,
Mhm.
David, your update.
Mm-hmm.
The board vacancy discussion and
Yep.
process.
Yep. That needs to be there. Anything else?
Do we need 2.2 treatment of staff?
Yeah, that
It
will
should be
come.
quick.
So we need to finish it up, but I think we're gonna be ready.
Yeah, it should be quick.
Can we put it on the consent agenda? No, we can't do that. Policy. Bad idea.
Which one is that?
2.2,
And you may, David, you may keep the Act 156 grant on.
yep.
Anything else? All right, so we will step back and give our student representatives an opportunity to report if they would like.
Oh, sure. Today, if some of you may know, was Freshman Community Service Day. So there's 15 slams, I believe. So each slam has 3 seniors, 1 faculty member, and about 15 to 16 freshmen. And so they each went to a location and did community service around Chittenden County. And so it was over 250 people from South Burlington High School today helping out. Thursday, the student council is running a blood drive, which will be in the high school gym from 9 to 2:30. So if you guys can come and donate blood, that would be great. You want to say what you're saying?
Last week was kneecap week, so the juniors took those. Those
And
were
you
a lot
got
of
ice
fun.
cream, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And bagels. It was
And
great.
bagels.
And juice. No, unfortunately. And then there were also sophomore exhibitions Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Friday. So that was cool.
All right,
Thanks, Sabine.
thank you very much. Appreciate it. That takes us to the minutes of May 1.
I don't know if we covered future agenda. I know a lot of these are on the retreat, but I didn't see an update on schools out.
Oh, that's next.
That's coming next
Yeah,
week.
it is coming next
Oh, it
week.
Or
is
the
next.
next meeting,
Yeah.
June 5th.
Got it, okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So that takes us to May 1. Everyone had a chance to look at the May 1 minutes? Are there any corrections or amendments to be made? If not, without objection, they'll be considered approved. Same question with respect to May 6. Are there any corrections or amendments that are required to make the May 6 minutes accurate? Hearing none, without objection, they'll be approved. And that takes us to May 15th. Are there any corrections or amendments to the May 15th minutes? I don't hear any. Without objection, they're approved. That takes us to the consent agenda, which includes some retirements. I don't know, David, do you have anything?
No, again,
Say
you know,
anything
these are always, you know, emotional, as people who've connected with people on many fronts and students, so, again, you know, it's with, you know, understanding and sadness, we say goodbye to some of these folks, certainly.
Bye and thank you.
Right, but grateful for their service, and I know here in this particular school, you know, Bob McGowan's been here, a member of the program, and I've had the opportunity just to hear from him a bit. So, again, these decisions sometimes to move on or to retire are not easy and surrounded with a lot of emotion. Not all of these are retirements, but some are moves, so.
Any questions or comments or requests to remove anything from the consent agenda? Is there any objection to the consent agenda? If not, it will be considered approved. It's approved. There's no comments required on the accounts payable orders, I assume. Are there any announcements?
Yeah, I have announcements at your place. Again, you've just got a little bit of some updates from Emily and Sabina. They're doing a nice job to help me out with some of those things. I appreciate it. Again, final concerts, you actually heard a little bit of one tonight from afar. And we've got some things happening on the marketplace coming up on June 5th. And we've got some announcements that some of our high school seniors have been recognized with scholarships. Also, our students at the middle school, the Polaris team, are studying optimal learning spaces. In this very space, Lee Dorr actually came back and provided just, again, a little bit of a segue to our earlier part of our conversation around configurations of schools, etc. But he did a really nice job. I wasn't able to stay for the whole thing, but provided the students with a lot of interaction, question, and provided a lot of new spaces. Dor Whittier here in our own South Burlington architect firm is doing a lot of work out of state, Massachusetts, some here in Vermont with some really vibrant new schools. Massachusetts, two, I think some of the largest high schools, you know, in their history. So that's happening. And then spring concerts, and then again a variety of picnic days and things that are happening to accommodate the year are fast approaching, as well as graduation and those diplomas to be signed and to be issued. So, as I said earlier, we'll work to come up with some times that Patrick will be hopefully in the lobby, let you know that. If it can work for you, then fine. If not, then know that those diplomas are ready and able to be signed. And if you wanted to just come and get them done, you could, and still be invited to come and sit at the table and pass on a diploma to the next person would be fine too. That's all I have.
I have
Any
one.
other announcements?
There's the academic awards night.
Yes.
Is Thursday night at 7 in the high school auditorium.
That's right.
And then the athletic awards night is the Thursday after that.
See, I was balanced. I forgot both. You see?
Well done.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily.
If not, then a motion to adjourn would be in order if there's nothing more. Is there such a motion?
So moved?
Second? Second. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.